Indiana is a top 10 team, and the rankings are finally reflecting that. Welcome back to Only Talk Sports. We talk sports every single day, or at least we try to. I'm Rush Jeffrey. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our video. Do not let people on the internet tell you that Indiana football is not a top 10 team. They are a top 10 team this season. I don't care what happens next year. I don't even care what happens the rest of this season with some tough games that Indiana has coming up. This football team is fantastic. This is the best Indiana football team that I've seen in my lifetime, even better than the Michael Penix team with Tom Allen back in 2020 and the 2019 team as well, because this is a complete football team. Indiana is dominating everybody that they play week in and week out, and they have a great offense and a great defense, a great coaching staff, and a great coach. I barely even see a weakness with this football team. That's a sign of a great team, and that's a sign of a top 10 team. And we finally see the rankings reflect that. Indiana is ranked 8th in the AP poll and 10th in the coaches poll. They are finally ranked in the top 10, despite the fact that they have been playing great football all season long, but they had to overcome preseason bias, which I don't blame the preseason voters for ranking Indiana so low. They were ranked like 77th in the preseason by like the S&P rankings, which I don't blame them for having them that low. I had Indiana going 7-5 this year. I didn't think they'd be a great football team. I thought they'd be much better this year and that they would make a bowl game with Curt Cignetti and all the transfers he has brought in. But since week one, Indiana has been on fire, dominating out of the gate, game in and game out, and they're doing better than like any other football team in college football with the amount of dominance that they have had. They finally trailed in a game this past week against Michigan State for the first time all season long. Only Army has not trailed in a game yet this season since Indiana finally trailed for a bit, but that shows you the dominance that Indiana has had. And I know that people are saying the schedule is not that hard. That is technically true, but we have seen even some of the blue blood programs in college football struggle against bad teams. Look at Georgia. They barely beat Kentucky 13-12. Alabama lost to Vanderbilt, who lost to Georgia State. Vanderbilt lost to Georgia State, but Alabama lost to Vanderbilt. These teams do not play always that well week in and week out. Ohio State beat Nebraska by 4 on their own field, and Indiana beat Nebraska by 49. But yet nobody's giving Indiana respect. Does that mean Indiana's going to beat Ohio State in a couple weeks? No, it does not mean that Indiana's going to beat Ohio State. Does it even mean that they're going to beat Michigan? No, because Michigan is a very talented team. Now, the way Indiana's been playing, you would think they would be able to knock off Michigan. But the point is people are gaslighting Indiana fans and just college football fans in general that Indiana is not a good football team when that is downright not true. Curt Cignetti has made this team, even if it's for 1 year, whether Curt Cignetti leaves for another program, which I hope doesn't happen, or whether once all these players end up going off to the NFL or graduate, because there are a lot of seniors on this team, a lot of these James Madison transfers, and even other guys like Curtis Rourke. If they move on from Indiana after this season and graduate, go pro, or maybe even some of them transfer, which I doubt many of these players will transfer, Indiana could be a worse team next year. That is very well true. Or they could lose some of the coordinators that they have this season that have been a big reason why they've been great with the great play calling that Indiana has had this season. But that doesn't matter. For this season and this season alone, Indiana is a top 10 football team. We do not need to go off the decades of terrible football that Indiana has had, and it's been terrible. A lot of 3-9 seasons, 2-10 seasons, but this Indiana team is fantastic. They have a Heisman contending quarterback in Curtis Rourke, who is only behind Cam Ward, Travis Hunter, Dylan Gabriel, and Ashton Genty in the Heisman odds. And honestly, if Curtis Rourke didn't miss 1.5 games, the half game against Nebraska and the Washington game with that thumb injury, Curtis Rourke probably would be even higher in the Heisman odds, maybe at number 3 or number 4 instead of at number 5, because unfortunately he wasn't able to put up any stats in those games. But he's having a great year. 19 touchdowns, only 3 picks. He has been picture perfect passing the ball, over a 70% completion percentage. He's a big reason Indiana's had a lot of success. Obviously, they got a great offensive line this year. They got great receivers. They got great running backs, which have aided Curtis Rourke. But Curtis Rourke is the head of the snake. He's playing great. So to have a Heisman contending quarterback in the odds shows you that Indiana is a top 10 team. And then when you look at their statistics, Indiana has the second best offense in college football according to stats in points per game, right behind Miami, who also has had an easy schedule. No one's faulting Miami for having an easy schedule and why they're undefeated. Miami's ranked at number 4 right now, where Indiana's ranked at number 8. But Indiana, because they're not a brand, and Miami's getting credit for having the best offense in college football, and they're ranked at number 4. If Miami had a tougher schedule, maybe they have a couple losses. Same thing with Indiana. Alabama has a couple losses, but people still think they're a great team because Alabama is a great team. They got tons of talent, and that preconceived notion that Alabama is always a great football team is going to make people rank them higher than maybe they should, even though they have lost a couple games this year. Alabama's had a tougher schedule. I agree. Alabama should still get a lot of credit that they deserve, but Indiana deserves credit too for being dominant just like Miami has. And then you look at their defense. Indiana has the 7th ranked defense in college football as well in points per game. They're barely giving up any points this year. Do you see Miami on that top 10 defensive list? No, you don't. Indiana is the only team basically in college football that has a top 10 offense and a top 10 defense outside of Ole Miss. I see Ole Miss on that list, and that is about it. I don't really see anybody else. So Indiana has been absolutely and utterly dominant this season on both sides of the ball. And the way that they have played, they look like a top 10 team, blowing everybody out, blowing UCLA out by 29 points on the road, more so than Penn State and LSU beat them by. They blew out the Nebraska Cornhuskers by a whole lot more than Ohio State did. They blew out Michigan State more than Ohio State did. And the only game that you could say they really struggled in was that Washington game, and that was without Curtis Rourke. That was Taven Jackson, their backup quarterback. And Taven Jackson did just enough for Indiana to be able to get that win. And they still won by 2 scores. And Indiana's defense was a big reason why. That's a sign of a great team. When you have adversity, the other side of the ball steps up. That's something Indiana didn't have 10 years ago with the Kevin Wilson era. Their defense was trash, and they could score 50 points and lose. Under Tom Allen, some years their defense was better, some years their offense was better, but it was never really both sides of the ball outside of maybe the 2020 season. That was a weird year anyway. But this Indiana team is complete on both sides of the ball. Great on defense, great on offense. They have a fantastic head coach in Curt Cignetti, and I know people are saying it could be a one-hit wonder, and it very well could. We saw it with TCU 2022, but even TCU back in 2022 had a lot of close calls. They were barely winning a lot of games. I've never seen a team like Indiana get this amount of disrespect with the amount of dominance that they have had. They have won every game by at least 2 scores, and they've even faced some adversity with their quarterback going down. Now Curtis Rourke is back, and Indiana is on a roll, and they are favored by 2 touchdowns against Michigan this week. I would have never thought that Indiana would be favored by 2 touchdowns against the Michigan Wolverines. Indiana's been on College Game Day. Indiana's had Big Noon Kickoff coming to town. They've also got CBS coming to town this week. So Indiana's getting national coverage, and a lot of media people that didn't want to admit that they were wrong about predicting Indiana to go 3-9 in the preseason, they're finally starting to come on board. But there's still a lot of disrespect. CBS doesn't even have Indiana in the CFP projections right now, which I don't know how you can do that. Indiana's ranked in the top 10 and they're 9-0 right now, and you don't have them in the CFP projections. If Indiana loses to Ohio State and they go 11-1 and they don't make the college football playoff, that is ridiculous. I don't care how easy their schedule's been. They have been utterly dominant, and they have looked like one of the 12 best teams in college football this year, so they absolutely should. Now, if they lose to Michigan and Ohio State, they go 10-2, leave them out. They still should get a big bowl game, and that would still be a fantastic season for Indiana, especially considering that they were only picked to win 5 games in the preseason. No one thought they were even going to make a bowl game barely. So Indiana football, they are having a fantastic year. I'm enjoying it for Hoosier fans. Enjoy it while it lasts, whether this is only a one-year thing or whether Curt Cignetti can keep it rolling in the future. Hopefully Curt Cignetti stays. I think Indiana has the money to pay him, but that's a whole other different video that we're going to have further on down the line talking about that and whether Indiana can keep Curt Cignetti. But even if Curt Cignetti stays and they don't do well in the future, maybe it was a one-year thing. I hope not, though. But Curt Cignetti's been a winner wherever he's been, and he is winning in Indiana right now. And do not let the media tell you that this is not a top 10 team, because Indiana football, based off everything I've just showed you, they got a Heisman contending quarterback. They have a top 10 offense and a top 10 defense. They're dominating everybody. Indiana football is playing like a top 10 team. They look like a top 10 team, and I would not be surprised if they continue to look like a top 10 team and maybe can crash that college football playoff party later this season. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below about Indiana's top 10 football team this year, and whether you are a believer in the Hoosiers or if you think that their glory season is going to come to an end with losses to Michigan and Ohio State and that they weren't a top 10 team, that the media members that think they're frauds are correct. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Like this video down below. Follow me on Twitter as well. Link is in the description, and I'll see you next time.